I was reading an
Interesting.
interesting book, to say the least, and what a figure he was in the history of violin. And the last time I heard any of his works in public was, I think, like so long ago, Elman played with piano accompaniment the 8th Spohr Concerto, and I was reading his autobiography.
Oh, yes.
What an extraordinary
He composed operas, I think, too,
operas
didn't he?
and 9 symphonies, and
Extraordinary.
this was the real classical beginnings of German
Yes.
violin playing.
Yes.
And then Joachim becomes the von
Yes,
Bülow
yes.
of the violin, in a
Yes,
sense,
yes.
in German.
I studied the Joachim Concerto with Persinger.
Is that the
of all
Hungarian
places.
concerto?
Yes, the Hungarian, which lasts 50 minutes or
Yes,
more.
it's huge.
Huge. I've never played it in public.
Well,
good
it's
work.
never caught on, of course.
No.
But he still lives, and you know that just recently a publisher published Joachim's letters. These people live on.
Yes, yes.
Mm.
But there are quite a few great violinists who've left legacies. I mean, the first and the greatest of all, of course, was Vivaldi and Corelli. Vivaldi, particularly Vivaldi. And his works are beautiful. They are also misleading. They look simple in the score.
Vivaldi.
And
Yeah.
always sound superb.
Yeah. Well, this leads me to ask you a little bit about the violin in Italy. The violin,
Yes.
the voice, the
Exactly.
Stradivarius, Corelli, Vivaldi, Tartini,
Yes,
Locatelli.
yes.
What a
wonderful,
school.
wonderful school, and very brilliant, very virtuoso, and at the same time very cantabile, real bel canto. And I think those sonatas and concerti should be the basic repertoire of the young violinist.
Any violinist ever study the Locatelli caprices?
Yes, my dear younger colleague Alberto Lisi,
Really?
who runs my academy in Gstaad, he plays them most brilliantly.
A marvelous composer is Viotti, and nobody knows that.
Viotti,
Yeah.
I quite agree. I'd made a recording of 2 unknown Viotti concerti some years ago, and I chose the one which Mozart had chosen as his favorite, and for which Mozart wrote orchestration. Mozart added timps and trumpets.
I didn't know.
Yes, and I chose that concerto because I thought how extraordinary. It's a beautiful one. Mozart even wrote a slow movement for it, because the slow movement is charming, but Mozart would have written a much more deep and dramatic one. Unfortunately, Mozart's slow movement is lost, but the timps and horns are not lost. But imagine, I made a point of that, told EMI about that. I come to the recording studio to find that they don't have timps and horns. They have it in Viotti's original orchestration. I said, but the whole purpose of this recording is to have Mozart's timps and horns. I said, I'm not going to record all that, Mr. North. That's all right. They said, don't you worry, we'll add them later. And so when you hear the recording, the timps and horns were added later.
Technology, and now, of course,
Yes.
the CD. You see, and people will have to buy that machine eventually because the LP will not be made in some year. It'll coexist for 30 or 40 years.
Exactly.
And then you'll have to have the machine. And it goes
Yes.
back to technology making what you have to buy.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Well, let's speak, as long as we're talking about the violin school. Tartini, what an incredible figure.
Yes. The other day I recorded with a Polish orchestra, I don't know if it's come out yet, a record consisting of 2 Tartini concerti and 2 Leclerc.
Really, there's
Beautiful.
the French style forming in
Yes,
Leclerc, right?
Yes, yes. The Leclerc is also an unknown composer.
Yeah.
And beautiful concerti. They need editing and a lot of ornamentation. But they are lovely concerti. The recording is beautiful. It's out in Germany, I know. I don't know if it's out in here.
Well, I haven't seen it yet, but I'll be looking forward to it. You know, when Tartini wrote the Devil's Trill Sonata,
Yes.
he said that he wrote it because he had a dream.
Yes.
But in the dream, the sonata was even more fantastic. He
Yes,
just couldn't and didn't have the means to put it down.
Yes. That was one of Ionesco's favorite sonatas.
Well, you know, it's a shame that Ionesco, you are holding Ionesco's name up in these lands. I know in Romania he still is a national hero. Have you ever thought that the second rung violin concerti are really much better than the second rung piano concertos?
How interesting! I'd never thought of that. I never thought of that. Certainly, the Ernst, the Bruch, the three Bruch concerti, which I recorded all three, are very good works. When I was choosing Vivaldi concerti, there was, however, a great difference between the best and those that were not. The others were rather weak. But
in Venice, I saw where he worked every day. And,
did you?
Yeah. I know that you knew Bernard Berenson.
Yes, we stayed at his Villino for a year and a half, nearly 2.
I know you love painting.
Yes.
You know, I have found that musicians are terribly unvisual, though. I don't know if you have found that. They're not.
I know that.
concerned
You're
with it.
quite right. You're quite right. They are all ears and not eyes, aren't they? In fact, you know that some tribes in Africa used to have the habit of blinding the children who were going to become musicians. Because
oh, my goodness.
Yes?
I had no idea of that.
Yes. Yes.
Isn't...
And the blind musician is a concept. I mean, it's the blind musician. Last Sunday afternoon, I played with Dascoli, a French musician who was blind, won at the Leeds competition. He did a very, very fine Beethoven C minor piano concerto. But, yes, you are right. But there are others who, again, have quite an eye. Do you remember the French conductor, French, that explains it, I suppose, in St. Louis? Years ago he died. He was there for years.
Now, who was in St. Louis? I know Vladimir Golshman was there.
Golshman, he's French, exactly. And he had a wonderful collection of Impressionist French paintings. And but it varies.
I didn't mean to, of course, make a generalization, but I
no,
have
but
found
you're
that
absolutely right, and to a very great extent.
They will look for a second at the most, and, you know, they run back to the practicing.
Yes, exactly.
Can we speak for a second on what in this country is a tumultuous problem, along with beer and vulgarity generally, and that is noise. No country in the world has more noise than the United States.
I couldn't agree with you more. I brought this matter up at UNESCO once and asking if we couldn't encourage some general aspect, some general measures to be taken to not only to reduce pollution of noise, but to institute quiet periods in all silence. I mean, silence used to be part of every religious service of meditation too. In fact, at my school every morning when they meet and sing and given a good thought, whether poetical, philosophical, whatever it may be, religious, mystical, it's followed by 2 minutes or approximately of silence. But silence is one of the most precious commodities, and in the big city, where the sound of what Schaeffer, the Canadian composer, Peter Schaeffer,
a wonderful book on noise too.
Isn't it excellent?
Yes, incredible.
And he is specialized in creating and discovering and researching what he calls the soundscape. Remember?
Yes.
Instead of the visual landscape, he reproduces the sound, the oral environment as it existed in different epochs, in different places, which was totally different to ours. I mean, the smithy, hammering away at the horseshoes, the carriages going on cobbles, and of course no electric motors purring away. No. We have a constant basic sort of ground tone, organ point, almost everywhere of electric motors which are inescapable. And what Schaeffer called noise with no signal value.
Yes.
In other words, for primitive people or for the Red Indian, if he took a walk in the country, every noise he heard had significance. In other words, if a leaf rustled, it was some animal going, or a man, or some particular wind that was blowing from a particular direction, because it was that particular sound that that particular kind of leaf made. And if it was a bird call, it meant something to him. He could probably understand whether it was a call of warning or of fear or of delight or whatever it may have been. Today, we are surrounded with sound which is meaningless.
Meaningless.
It
and
has
I don't
no-
agree with John Cage that all noise is equal.
No, I don't at all either. But we have this noise without signal value, and that is again an encumberment on our existence. To be surrounded with meaninglessness is one aspect of noise, as great a nuisance as the volume which renders us deaf.
Yes.
Between the two, I wouldn't know what to choose, the fact that it's meaningless or the fact that it's intolerable. Both are horrible, and we deaden our senses. We become numb. We become numb to pain, our own, and by extension, we become numb to other people's pain.
This is a wonderful theme that George Steiner writes about in Bluebeard's Castle. George Steiner wrote your preface.
Yes.
What an extraordinary man.
Isn't he a wonderful man?
Oh.
Yeah. He and Isaiah Berlin are the two, how shall I say, pretenders to, or the two actual people who, one at Oxford, the other at Cambridge, who are the great literary authorities.
Oh, he is amazing. He is amazing. He says the numbing prodigality of the violence that we see on television, the noise we hear, we're becoming numb, and that's the great danger of this.
Yes. I cannot understand those people who say that they don't believe that television has any influence on us. It's such nonsense. But everything has an influence on us. If one talks to a human being, it's an influence, surely we learn. If one breathes air, it's an influence for good or bad. You cannot pretend that something that takes hours of each day,
7.5 hours of every American.
It's unbelievable. You cannot pretend that 7.5 hours are spent on something that leaves no trace whatsoever. It's nonsense.
And of course it's nonsense. Why would there be 400 million handguns in the United States?
Yes, exactly.
Every scene on television has a handgun in it.
Yes.
And as Chekhov once said, if in Act 1 there is a gun on the desk, it has to be used in the play.
Of course, of course. And then seen by children on television, and seeing the same character come back the next week after he's been shot dead, they have no idea of what it means.
And this is part of this numbing, and the noise is part of the numbing. And you think that you have just discovered a lake so far away that there's no way of getting any sound, and soon you'll hear that motorboat.
Exactly.
There's no escaping these engines.
And the pure silence of those snowscapes in Canada has been largely ruined by these snowmobiles.
You've seen the work of Gould, the idea of the North, his documentary film.
No.
It's a wonderful, wonderful work of his. The idea of the North. He was up there, but I want to speak now.
Going just back to one thing about noise. The most hideous noise I know is the sound of the electric tree cutter.
I hate it.
I think that's hideous. I can't bear it.
See, I will say that air pollution is hideous, but nothing is psychologically as harmful to all of us as this unbelievably meaningless noise.
Yes.
I can't understand in a city like New York that there is a subway system like this permitted, that the people will permit it.
Yes.
It's so ghastly to be down in this hell.
Yes, it is
and
hell.
It has become a hell.
Well, I knew it when it was hell to me, but it was compared with what it is now, heaven, in 1924. My mother and I often took the subway, and we avoided rush hours because rush hour was terrible. But what it must be like now must be unbelievable.
Don't go down there.
No, I have no desire
The
to.
noise, and now you know, and no one is trying to stop it. Now fires every 20 minutes. You see them pass, and any moment it can ignite, and it does 40, 60 times a week. Now,
Because of the
maybe
gas-
there's a conspiracy,
gas
Mr.
leak
Menuhin.
thing.
Yeah, nothing is working at all, and maybe there's a conspiracy that we just want the whole subway system to go on fire. I do not know, but it is unbelievable. With the fire and the noise, and they charge you money. Think of it. They charge you money to go on this.
You know, I had plans for New York during the war, when it was really the greatest city in the world,
Yes.
most wonderful city in the world. And my plans were relatively simple, but they would need a little effort. They consisted in three different measures. One was to clear out 3 or 4 floors from every building, the bottom of every building, so that you'd have free pedestrian motion throughout the block. You see, instead of the pedestrian being squeezed between the road and the building, he just walked through the building underneath. In fact, all the apartment houses in Tel Aviv are built on that principle. They're all, and it would be quite easy. You'd leave, of course, the lift shaft, the elevator shaft, but otherwise it would be clear. That would be one thing. Then you'd build over the present streets, garden streets, so that all the streets would be planted with trees, and the present roadway would be maintained, but only for electric transport. So that you'd look down on quiet, green squares, nothing but green, and then an electric transport below. Then the other thing was a sort of catwalk covered between all the buildings that were above a certain level, at an average level, so that you'd have entrances to those buildings from a high level as well as from street level, which would mean that you could do your shopping promenading between buildings at a certain height, say an average of whatever it is, 20 stories or 15 or whatever, and go into the building from that level, taking the pressure away from the street level. You see?
Wonderful.
And that kind of imaginative job could have been done. And, of course, subway's a disgrace. But there's so much money in New York, but all of it private. None of it is available for public
It's like
works.
patronage, Mr. Menuhin. Everyone is giving their, tax deductible whatever to an institution, but individuals who need it are not getting it. There's no patrons that will give the young a violin or let them practice for 3 years undisturbed, give them some fellowship. It always has to go to some institution, which is not really, it's not the same as a person giving to another person.
I think one of the best propaganda measures the Russians could do is not to send money and food to the British miners, who really don't need it. Nobody starves in England, but to give New York a new subway system. Wouldn't that be
wonderful?
Tremendous gesture.
Theirs is wonderful, I hear. That would be one of the great gestures in human history.
Yes, and not likely to happen.
We have on 6th Avenue building after building. And I think I first read this idea in Buckminster Fuller. He said, so many people, there are 60,000 people walking around without homes.
I know.
Well, we have to start thinking differently, don't we? Why, in a city of 10 million, why are there not staggered hours? The computer in all of these places does these things in 1 hour. People can go home. Why do they have to be there for 8 hours a day and waste their time? And they're home most of the time. So we have hundreds of these phenomenal buildings which could... The homeless could be occupied in there, sleep in there, have apartments. Let's give this space to people.
Yes, I quite agree.
So there's many things that can be done.
But I think any society, to be stable, must have a basic level below which people can't sink. After that, let them compete as much as they like to. The strength of Italy used to be that it had cheap pasta and cheap oranges. Fruit. That meant that no one need go hungry and they'd have that. Now, everything is so geared to price that nothing is cheap. Nothing good is cheap. Things that are cheap are generally poisonous. And I think that good bread, the national loaf, as it was in England during the war, health was never better than then. A good loaf fruit in season, tents for shelter if need be, a winter coat, good pair of shoes. Those kind of things should be free, totally free.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And then let people compete as much as they want to for everything else.
Exactly. Oh, this would be a wonderful plan. Now, why are not the governments of the world putting your plans to use? In other words...
My plans have never been put to use, except...
Well, when will it happen?
I just feel a little better for 5 minutes when I speak about them. But
well,
I have
some
no
of these
illusions.
ideas are going to stimulate some people, I'm sure. I don't care if IBM gives up that space, which should only be used for their business now with computers more than 2 hours a day. Let the 60,000 people that are homeless in New York have apartments.
Well,
or if they want to have them or not, it's up to them.
If the place is free. What I feel is that it's a great mistake in any city to build office blocks and office districts. Every district should be lived in.
Mm-hmm.
The buildings should go up that are part office and part residential, so that people needn't commute, so that people can live near their work, as in the old days, the craftsmen and their family, and today even the few people who make shoes by hand do them at home, and they live with their family. And many people I know pursue their craft, whether it's making violins, in their home. Why do cities become derelict, devastated areas at night when the offices are closed? Because people assume that they have to live elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
It's why that Wall Street would be a wonderful place to live in if half the space were not only for apartments and dwelling places, theaters and all the rest. Well, how exciting to live there.
We have to have a drastic relook at the way we live
New
in
York
cities.
is better off than other cities because at least people live on Madison Avenue
Exactly.
and work down on the streets. But other cities are totally dead at night.
Yeah, totally dead, and of course, based on fear.
Yes.
One of the...
But why can't... another thing, architects, buildings should never be only office buildings, there's also dwellings. And again, a little village in the Middle Ages, or more recently, used to have its town hall, and used to have its library, and so on. Why isn't it obligatory on any building that houses more than so and so many hundreds of people that they have a place where amateur sculptors can work, where musicians can practice, where people can get together for a lecture? It should be part and parcel of every group of a few hundred people. Now you have the monstrosity of cities of 14 million with less cultural facilities than would be normally in a city of 300,000.
Yes.
What happens is that those cultural facilities that exist are of a very high order.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the Metropolitan Opera is superb. The concerts you get, but that's superb. The quality of and the pressure of a big city produces standards that are unbeatable. But one cannot sacrifice millions and millions of people to standards only. There must be high standards, but there must be a compromise whereby the millions of people have also something, some culture, and some opportunities in their lives. Now, what we're discussing is basic. I think an edict, a law, whereby no building could go up without communal rooms in it for various purposes, artistic, intellectual, whatever it may be.
Or a whole room just to come and do yoga in.
Also, gymnasiums and yoga and meditation.
Meditation and yoga became an important part of your life after you discovered India.
Yes, indeed. Meditation, I feel, I never really did Indian meditation. I meditate in my music when I study a score or when I think about it. But I use the Hatha Yoga, which is the postures. Breathing also. Breathing is a very great, important aspect of yoga. And The sad thing in our life, which is a civilized life, is by definition civilization is the taking away of what is natural and supplanting of it by what is man-made, art if you wish, or craft. And people have to learn to breathe, they have to learn to walk, they have to learn to be natural, they have to learn everything. And very few people have the chance to do that.
And hardly the inclination.
Yes, and the time.
I know that this is a more frivolous question, but I have to include a few.
Yes.
And I know that you had your first license at the age of 12.
That's
and
right.
You just, do you still love cars, automobiles? Because you did for a while.
I did. I adore them. It was my passion to drive a car. And I remember a friend of ours, when I was a boy, had a Duesenberg. And it was in Pittsburgh. I also loved coming to Pittsburgh for that reason alone. I can't say now. I'm more disillusioned with cars because the fun of driving in California when I was 12.
How you loved California then.
I adored it. And the roads were not too crowded. Oh, Sunday evenings coming back from Marin County, people piled up waiting long queues for the ferry boats, before the bridges, of course. But driving was a hobby of mine. I still love driving when it's in the country, and I used to love driving in Paris, because Paris, didn't adopt the red and green lights until after the war. There were hardly any red and green lights in Paris at all. It was a free-for-all.
Really?
So you'd approach crossing the street corner, hooting your horn, and sort of sniffing out if someone was coming to meet you. And it was really a game. The Arc de Triomphe still is to a certain extent.
Yes, it sure is.
It's a game of finding your exit and your entry. But I loved driving in Paris at that time.
Well, one thing in your autobiography, it really frightened me a bit because you said that the stones, it's so hard to walk in Paris because the stones are different.
The sidewalks are very hard.
And it's tiring, and that's a shame because it's a city that you should walk in.
Yes. Well, I suppose if you have soft soles, it would be all right.
England has always loved you. They loved Chrysler, but they love you more. You're like a national. You're like Clementi and Mendelssohn and Handel.
National, Handel and Haydn.
And it's reciprocated. You love England.
I love England, yes, I do. And I love, for instance, this English orchestra, which I'm coming, the Royal Philharmonic. It's a wonderful spirit.
What? Yeah? One second. It's coming in, the engineer.
They probably want to eat or do
Well, that's not us. That's Jim Pinckney trying to answer the front door. He's plugging.
Oh, I see. All right. Well, okay. Where were we? The English spirit. Yes.
Yeah.
I'll go stop Jim.
Can you go? Okay. Yeah.
Yes, the team spirit, the wonderful way in which the English orchestra differs, say, from the German. If there's a problem in the German orchestra, will await the conductor's guidance, and he will resolve the problem. Any problem that can be solved by the section in England, in an English orchestra itself, will be solved with no burden on the conductor at all. They get together, they're fingering. So now, if I want a particular fingering, then I ask them to try it, and it may or may not be better than the ones they're using. But they will always sort out their own problems in each section, and one has to also learn to treat them, well, I would anyway, with the respect that is their due, because they are such wonderful musicians. They have such a sense of style, whether you're doing Mozart or Bach or Stravinsky. Furtwängler used to prefer doing Tristan with the Philharmonia Orchestra than with the Berlin Philharmonic.
Really, I didn't know that.
He adored them. And Toscanini preferred the BBC to any orchestra that he knew. The English musician is quite remarkable. He's very quick. He sight reads remarkably, and one has to also know how to handle them at rehearsal. The other day, I was rehearsing with Pogorelic.
Really?
And he was doing the Tchaikovsky piano concerto.
He has sat right in this seat, and we've had a wonderful talk.
Well, he's an odd character. I don't think he's found himself yet.
No, and he may never find himself.
And he is an incredible talent, a tremendous
Yes.
talent. And he was doing the Tchaikovsky concerto, which he has done since he was, probably before he was born.
1
he had
year
already.
old, yeah.
And first of all, his wife had come to see me the day before because he was detained by an air flight delay in Yugoslavia. So she came and went through the concerto, told me exactly what he'd like. So I thought I was prepared, and then at the rehearsal he did some different things and said, I said, well, I only did this because it's your own wife who told me that's where you did that. But that's not the point of it. The point of my story is that we were rehearsing, and then at one time he said, look, this passage is so passionate and so emotional and tragic, and the orchestra is playing it so coolly. I said, well, you don't quite understand. We're rehearsing it to determine how we're going to play it. However, I said, just be patient. And I addressed the orchestra and said, look, we have with us a wonderful pianist who's trained in the Russian tradition, and they, go full out 24 hours round the clock. And whether they're rehearsing or giving a concert, they always give all they have. It's not our way, because we like to reserve it for the concert, but let us play this passage as he'd like to hear it now. And so they played it with all the passion, that no Russian orchestra could do better than that. And he was very happy. Now I said, now you know how it can be, and it will be this evening. Now let's go on working.
Oh, what a superb story. I will never forget that. And how did you like that tempo that he wants? He makes the Tchaikovsky concerto very long.
Yes, he does. He does.
But how did he get away with getting his performance? Most 26-year-old pianists hardly get their way with a conductor.
They hardly. But there was a good entente. He accepted, and I naturally feel, having been a soloist all my life, I feel that the conductor's job is to follow the soloist and to humor them.
Well, you have a wider experience than most. While you were telling me that story, you used an important word in your life, which is patience. And patience is it's more of an Indian character.
Yes, but it's not passive patience.
No.
My patience is really a kind of dogged impatience. What it is, faith. My patience, I can be patient if I'm convinced that I'm on the right track, and something is happening all the time which is going eventually to yield the right fruit. Then I can be patient. Mm-hmm. I cannot be patient with things that require total resignation. But whereas the Indian can, their patience is of a higher kind. Perhaps it's a passive,
or maybe more dangerous to their survival. I don't know.
Yes, perhaps I can be patient if I know that the thing is, cooking quietly, simmering on the stove, and will be ready in 6 hours, 6 years, or 6 decades, or perhaps for the next generation. But I want to believe that.
Well, yours is a creative patience.
It's on the right track.
Yes.
And then you must have faith, too, that it's going to be one day right.
Yes. So your patience is part of a flame of discontent, really.
Well, it's a matter of faith. I have the inner feeling, I can tell when I'm on the right track, even if it appears impossible or hopeless or wrong. I feel, for instance, for the few things I've proposed, I know they're right.
Mm-hmm.
I can't believe that they're wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And that much, and yet I know that they're not going to happen probably in my lifetime, ever. So I cannot afford I cannot storm the powers that be. You have to accept that. And that's sometimes difficult if you know that people are suffering at the same time.
If there is some sort of afterlife, though, I will bet that, and if you have thought of this, I'll bet that you would like to drill a little hole from wherever you are and watch down and see how the Earth is coming along.
I don't really know. I do believe that there is continuity.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know of any way of defining it. I don't believe it's a primitive continuity that consists in having everything we would have liked to have had here, there, only better.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Oh, of course.
That surely can't be the case. But I do believe that there is a continuity in motion. We know that. And that there must be a continuity in the genes. We know that too. And we know that we bequeath our children certain things. And whether there's a continuity actually in spirit, I wouldn't know. But we have to live in that ignorance and in that faith.
And living in that ignorance has always been lonely for the human race.
Yes, they'd like to be assured. The human race wants always to know that the earth is absolutely flat and you can't fall off. You know, a kind of lovely flat ground with a high railing around it.
Yes.
And that it's not moving, God forbid, it mustn't move. And what has shaken the human race as much as anything is the knowledge that everything is moving, that we are moving, that nothing is permanent, that the human beings one day will disappear, that the earth one day will vanish, and that the solar system will crumble and go. That is very difficult for the human being. What he's striving all his life is to assure that his children will inherit what he has, that tomorrow is going to be planned and take place as it's planned, and therefore he is singularly unprepared for the unexpected. And you will find that people on the eve of a war will still be going about their little tasks. The Jews in Germany, who continued living under Hitler and couldn't believe what he had written in his book and what he had forecast, what was being done during that time.
Right in front of their eyes.
Right in front of their eyes.
Unbelievable. And they called it a Holocaust, and that word is, of course, totally wrong. A Holocaust is something that moves very quickly. This was very slow.
Very, very deliberate, very planned, and that was what makes it so terrible, because we will accept killing in the heat of war.
They wanted the security that they were German.
Yes, yes. They felt threatened.
To be a German was to feel secure.
Yes.
Even though there was such inflation for 20 years.
Yes. Well, that contributed to their insecurity, to their need to. But human beings everywhere, we don't know from now to the next moment whether we will survive, but you have to live with some sort of inner calm and faith that
it's hardest now for the young.
Terrible for the young.
In this country, there's a suicide attempt, one every minute.
No, I didn't realize
and one
that.
achieved every 2 hours.
I thought the Japanese were the highest in suicide.
Well, I don't know about that, but I know that here,
but
at this moment,
dreadful.
That's the new
but
statistic.
How perfectly dreadful.
Well, you know, as human beings, we want to leave something of ourselves, and I think one man said that he had hoped that he could leave something, even if it was hanging in midair, just some little thing. He said, but I don't know how a 16-year-old could feel that. In fact, if I were 16 years old again, I think I would start imperceptibly going insane. I would start doing away with language. I would not trust language anymore.
Yes, well, quite well. Look
we
at
have
the words.
So many of them now. You see, so many languages, so many countries.
And look at the words that have been debased. I mean, you can't use the word peace without talking politics. You can't use the word freedom any longer. No one knows what it means. No. People think it's license. It's quite terrifying, and yet the causes of the evil are so obvious.
Obvious.
Lack of home, lack of love, lack of cohesion, social cohesion, noise, all the pesticides, all the poisons. We are absorbing poisons at a rate that they've proven that lead in the water from old lead pipes in Liverpool leads to insanity. It's proven on monkeys. Do you know that the bleaching agent that has been used in white bread since 1870, when they introduced those first metal, white bread metal, what do they call them, that took all the bran and the wheat germ out of the flour, mills, the metal milling process. Then they used an agent to bleach the flour, agene, which they've only stopped a few decades ago, about 20 years ago. Well, during 50 or 60 years, the American people were fed bread with a bleaching agent that made monkeys go mad.
It's unbelievable.
So is it any wonder?
Well, when you saw me with my soft drink today,
yes,
and you read the label, and you said to me, well, this product contains saccharine, which has been determined to cause cancer in laboratory animals. And you said, isn't it unbelievable that they would let out on the market something that they know causes cancer? And if it causes it in laboratory, why not us?
Of course it
Aren't
does.
we animals?
Yes, exactly.
Well, so far in our discussion, we have had many topics and many areas where life is not going uphill. It's not
going
getting
downhill.
Better.
Many ways it's getting worse, yes. Yes. It's absolutely true.
So we wonder why children cannot, knowing that security is such an important issue in the human race, that they're terrified of the unknown, that they cannot bear to live, so they try to kill themselves.
Here's an example of freedom abused. Freedom is abused either for power or for money. Here it's abused for money. And they will say, as with pornography, they will say freedom of the press. But that's nonsense, of freedom of television. One has to realize that restraint and freedom are part of the same thing. And you can't have this kind of freedom abused. Diana has a perfectly excellent solution for pornography, and I would apply it to sales generally. We all accept the principle that rich people or people who earn more should be taxed more than people who earn less. We all accept it, and it's perfectly right. Well, why not tax records, books, soft drinks, anything that sells and produces profit above a certain amount, tax it enormously. In other words, it would mean that those minority tastes, if you wish, or works that are scholarly works books put out by universities on interesting subjects, but not with a wide public. Anything selling for, say, a record sells for 50,000 copies would be taxed minimally, if at all. One selling 500,000 copies would pay much more tax, progressive tax. The same on theatre, musicals. Experimental theatre, small theatre, would pay no tax at all. The musicals that run for a year and make millions, they would pay a great deal of tax.
Yes. Well, that's an extraordinary and productive idea. And I am always amazed at the figures I read. Did you know that, think of this, a recording by Michael Jackson called The Thriller sold 50 million copies.
It's incredible.
Now this should be taxed then,
of course,
and the tax should be used then for various things. Rock and roll has been going on for 25, 30 years. It has hardly produced anything worthwhile. The businessmen have just entrapped people into this constantly. The decibels rise. The Rite of Spring cannot produce in full orchestra anything near the decibel
No.
of an amplified
No.
rock concert.
Yes.
We have the tax then from the Michael Jackson should go to the foundations for hearing aids,
Yes, I
because
quite agree.
millions
Yes,
can't
millions.
hear anything.
I know. No, there should be also, as much as there is a nuisance, nuisance is prohibited of certain kinds, decibels beyond a certain level should simply be prohibited, because people are made deaf, just as the army guns make the recruits deaf, you know.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's another issue. How could anyone who thinks at all deeply, how could they go into the army knowing that this is a murderous...
Well, wait a minute. I'm not absolutely with you there. I think that I would make a distinction between drafting purely for use of guns and drafting for national and international service. I think the general draft is a good thing. Conscription could be a good thing if it were a contribution to the Enlightenment, to the sense of service, if it for famine relief that we spoke of, community service, learning trades and so on, as they used to advertise army service, and defending your country or your alliance or the world civilization against, for instance, when the Falklands issue came up, the whole of the world was behind England, the Security Council to a man. And obviously England was in her right. I mean, it was an attempt to take over by force a bit of land that didn't belong to them, however near it was to the mainland. All right. Now there was the opportunity for Margaret Thatcher, whom I admire. I think she's a remarkable woman, courageous, total integrity, and probably what England needs at the moment. But there was the moment when she should have said, there is no international organization to prevent this kind of attack on defenseless people. Look at the Russians in Afghanistan. We will do the job. We will do the job. But I hereby place a quarter of the British Navy and the Army at the service of an international organization where I would expect a quarter of the American, a quarter of the Japanese, to serve this purpose, so that these are always standing by to prevent any such aggression. Well, that was her moment. That was a great moment missed.
Do you think she ever thought of it?
I don't know. I don't think she did. But I think that was a moment in history, and there are a few moments. There was another such moment when Sadat came to Jerusalem. There were a few great moments in history. There were the moments when the Russians went into Czechoslovakia when we didn't do anything about it.
Yeah. You mean in 1968?
Yes.
This Prague Spring?
Yes. But this was a positive moment when the Security Council and all, and a gesture by one country saying, we give a quarter of our services, and you do the same, and we shall see to it that, on the other hand, that could only go hand in hand with a recognition that frontiers are not permanent.
Wonderful.
Because
how could they be permanent when Bartók was born in
exactly
in Hungary, and today he's born in Romania?
Exactly. Exactly.
How silly.
It's perfectly silly.
The Indians,
So,
the
but you
Maumee
can't-
Indians didn't know that Ohio was a
No.
certain boundary.
No, they had their regions, and they fought wars, the Red Indians, but they had sacred places where they refused to fight.
Yes. Well, the American Indian is one of the tragic pages in this country's
Yes,
history, and
yes,
it's
it
not
is.
discussed in the history books
No.
very much.
And I think a beginning should be made. And history books also offer an enormous field for improvement and revision.
You once said, we Americans have begun to appreciate how well the Indians preserved their inheritance before it was delivered to our rapacity,
Yes.
our rapacious appetite. for land, for trees. And
well, it's this tradition of private ownership, which I think has its place. You see, I think everything has its place. Public ownership, private ownership, lands that no one can own and that are protected. Look what has happened to the nomad, the gypsy nomad in Europe, the nomads traditionally in Iran, Iraq, who dwelt in their black tents and drove their cattle and their sheep and floated them across the rivers. These nomadic peoples are our ancestors and were a way of life and should be respected. Ideally, they should be respected, as all ways of life are. But we have, if private property is pushed beyond a certain point, and nationalism, the nomad's life has been nearly ruined.
Sure.
When I was in Iran, there were still nomads. We came across them, and they had their own way of life, which was a wonderful way, not an easy way, a very difficult one, but that depended on the weather and where the grazing was best, and a certain cycle of life. We have come in with heavy, flat feet, with no respect for living species, including our own.
You have said that you were blessed with good low blood pressure.
Yes.
I hope that remains.
Yes, it's still on the low side.
How do I get that?
Do you also have low blood pressure?
No, I don't. I want to have it.
Well, I don't know how.
It just came. It was born.
It's a part of my physiology. But they do say that watermelon reduces blood pressure. And, of course, meat raises blood pressure. Meat raises, red meat more than anything else. So if you went on... fish is white, especially white meat isn't so bad. Fish and fruit, vegetables, fresh fruit, that lowers blood pressure.
Do you think that life is... We've said that many things are going down. Was life much simpler in 1930?
All I can tell you is that San Francisco used to be my dream city. First of all, the air and the water, well, for that matter, water. When I was a boy, the city water in New York was the most pure and crystalline, wonderful water imaginable. Came straight from the mountains. It was the best city water that any city could ever boast of. But San Francisco was a wonderful city, beautiful, clean, people very friendly, neighborly, good community feeling, very clean. It really was a dream city. Now, if the wind is blowing the wrong way from the Richfield oil refineries, the air is polluted. There's still enough wind coming for the most part from the west for the air to be rather better than most cities are. It still is wonderful, still is romantic city, but it has lost a great deal of that simplicity. The San Franciscans used to put a knapsack on their shoulders and go Saturdays and Sundays hiking in Marin County, up Mount Tamalpais in Muir Woods. And I don't suppose many people hike today, but the whole city, it seemed to me, was out hiking over the weekends. It was a very simple civilization. The automobile had just come in. There weren't so many automobiles on the streets, and there were still electric cars. Very elegant ladies in lace-draped electric cars. The windows were lace-draped, going up the very steep San Francisco hills, very slowly but relentlessly, as San Francisco women are. You know, and if only the gasoline engine had waited upon improvements in the electric propulsion, we'd have had a different civilization. In one way, anyway.
And of course, there would be no sprawling cities. San Francisco.
No.
There would be more like there would be more cities like San Francisco.
Yes, the first city built on the automobile is Los Angeles, of course.
Yeah. And in some ways the most disastrous still.
In some ways, yes, it is. Wonderful people, extraordinary city. I mean, you can
called
find
California a paradise. You even said that in these days, in these early days, you even said that you felt sorry for people not born to have
Yes.
experienced what California was.
Yes, the Northern California particularly, I loved it. Free, beautiful, and everyone lived in nice wooden houses that were on the whole very comfortable. It was very much, San Francisco was very much the English climate, because there are no extremes, no snow. There was snow in London 3 days ago.
You still love London as much as you always did?
Yes, I
Still?
do, although London has changed, of course, for the worse again.
Mm-hmm.
But it still is a wonderful city.
You once said to practice is one thing, to perform another, and there is yet a third requiring more stamina than either, which is to rehearse with one's colleagues for hours on end and come up not wilting.
Yes, well, I enjoy rehearsals, but one has to see progress in anything, improvement, to get satisfaction. I think, and many people lead hopeless lives, and that is a terrible thing.
Well, this hopelessness has to come out, though, then in some form of
It does.
violence,
It
either
does.
in child
It
beating,
does.
wife beating.
Exactly, it does. It does. And then a certain credit must be given basic perversity in man. I think we can never get away completely. We can't blame entirely. They used to say crime was only because people were poor.
Mm-hmm.
Now, of course, rich people are just as good at it.
Mm-hmm.
And the young, it's simply a climate, a general climate. We know what it comes from: frustration, dissatisfaction, and finally dissatisfaction with money, because money doesn't buy anything really worthwhile.
No. So what do we have now? More Philistine entertainments than we could have ever imagined 50 years ago. The video game. I mean, it's an
Yes.
addiction that is
Yes.
far past pornography, and for most people who are
but
interested.
then again, you have millions of good people young people who realize it and who are on the good path.
Mhm.
It started off with the hippies, who were a bit disorganized and just were negative, but they're beginning to formulate their principles. It takes time. You can't escape the need for the passage of time, just as a tree or a crystal or a coal or a diamond need time before.
Perhaps
So
we're in a transition era
we are
to a
in
new
yes.
awareness where we
think
will
so.
save ourselves.
I think so, but unfortunately, we don't have as much time as we need. That is the crucial point. I think we have burnt so much of our time behind and ahead of us that it used to be that we could never do so much damage as might destroy the whole earth. Now we can.
Now we can. That's a whole new area of thought that people
Yes.
do not really
Yes.
realize.
No. And we don't have, when it comes to pollution, look what's happening now more and more quickly, more rapidly in succession. The Bhopal disaster, we've had nuclear disasters already here. There's a continuous nuclear pollution which results in leukemia and certain forms of cancer, which occur in areas of low pressure like St. Louis more than in other parts of the country, because that's where it gathers. And we are continually subject to this accumulation, this progressive accumulation of poisons, which are that much more active when they are working together. The food poisonings, the chemicals, the nuclear waste, and so on and so forth. So that we are going to be faced more and more with situations which demand catastrophes, which demand immediate action, for which we are unprepared, and that these will occur more and more in rapid succession. That's why these statistics that extrapolate a certain population by a certain date, I think, are wrong, because it'll be either some catastrophe, if not war, it'll be some other catastrophe that's bound to attack us long before we've reached those figures, I think. But it's something that requires urgent action, and yet all our sense of urgency is directed to issues which are really not relevant. We are fighting 19th century and caveman issues at a time when they are in fact no longer relevant.
Yes.
Because other issues are much more important. But the important issues we're not attacking at all. We're still fighting in terms of who's going to win the next wars, if anyone is going to win the next war.
Imagine, think of it.
We're still thinking in terms of who is going to get a piece of land or to protect a boundary or a frontier when it's no longer relevant.
No longer relevant. Only our survival now.
Exactly.
And the time is...
And people are fighting, as they've always fought, simply out of bad habit. And
well, they're conditioning. They're bad,
it's a conditioning of millions and millions of generations.
Yeah.
As I say, cavemen.
We always say, oh, yes, we all have everything in us, the collective unconscious. Indeed, most of that great unconscious is terrible garbage.
Yes.
With a little bit of good violin playing thrown in, or a few pieces of great music or literature. A few, because...
But no doubt we are living in an age that demands what I call a new morality. Now, it's not... By that I don't mean breaking with Lao Tzus and Buddhas and Jesus and Moses. They were the prophets. They were great people. And we'll never produce better people than that.
No.
And what they had to say is still relevant. But what we made of their teachings was only relevant to a different type of world. We cannot assume now that man is born without a soul and only gets it at baptism. We cannot assume that animals have no feelings. We cannot assume that man is here, which was never meant like that, to exploit every other form of life. The rest of life was put in the custody of man for his protection, for him to be custodian, not exploitator.
As you are a custodian, what is the
Custodian,
word? I'm really having trouble.
No.
A curator of the masterpieces that you now play.
Or even of the violin that I supposedly own.
Sure.
But
I mean, go on.
I hope I may pass it on. In fact, if it was stolen, I'd much rather it was stolen by someone who loved it and could play it.
Oh.
Same
Imagine
as
Stradivarius in his workshop in 1710. Imagine thinking of his instrument here still holding on in a world like this, and still treasured by a few.
Yes.
You once said, you once used a phrase for some of the playing now, and I find this phrase so true, an anonymous brilliance.
Yes. That's a kind of a patent leather shine, which doesn't belong to a particular
It's on everything,
style.
the Kreutzer Sonata, the Tchaikovsky Concerto.
You can just put a little shoe shine on it.
This anonymous brilliance. I have often noticed that although Russian players are admirable in their technique and temperament, they have a rigidity about any idea. For instance, I said to one young woman, why don't you just improvise on the piano, make some sounds? And instantly she said, oh no, the piano is a beautiful instrument, I don't want to make ugly sounds.
Yes. Well, it depends on the training. You see, it has been so very thought out, so methodical.
Yes.
The Russian method is very demanding. If you fail, it's gradated, first of all. I know that from Felix Andreevsky, who was a wonderful teacher and teaches at my school, and Gstad. But every stage, every particular position, every fingered octave, comes at a given time in the evolution of that teaching, which covers 15, 20 years.
But this does breed a certain kind of rigid discipline.
It does. And then if you fail at a certain time, you go back to the beginning. It's really something which, in the Western world, we could hardly take. But those who survive are, of course, very remarkable. The rest go into orchestras and so on, which is, again, something we could never accept. an orchestra musician is a great musician, and an orchestra leader like Barry Griffiths of the Royal Philharmonic is a wonderful, wonderful colleague and a man who carries a tremendous responsibility. But in Russia, somehow the hero, the soloist, the Tsar, the dictator, they've never known an enlightened civilization. They've never known a democratic civilization.
No, that's right.
How should they be other than they are? They've just continued the Tsars.
Only worse.
you know, even worse.
Only
there's
worse.
There's a lovely story. You probably know it, about Brezhnev meeting the last Tsar, Nicholas, in heaven.
No.
And Tsar said, "I've been waiting for you all this time. I've been waiting to meet you. Now tell me, how are things in our old Russia? Tell me, are the frontiers well guarded?" "Oh, yes, impenetrable frontier." "And are is the opposition well dismissed?" "Oh, yes, all in exile, all in exile." "Bravo, bravo, you're doing very well, very well." And tell me, is the vodka still 28%? "Oh, no, the vodka is 30%. "Oh," and he said, "did you have to go through that miserable revolution just for 2%?
Oh. It's wonderful. You have, of course, played the Kreutzer Sonata. We're speaking of Russia, and my mind just went to the Kreutzer Sonata, and then probably that you have read once at least the small novel by Tolstoy called the Kreutzer Sonata.
Yes, I have.
What are the great writers that have been important to you? Have you always been a reader?
Yes, I've loved reading. The philosopher who's influenced me most is an unknown man by the name of Konstantin Brunner, a German Jew, and whose writings were sent me by a friend, one of his friends, anonymously in Holland in 1938. I fell upon them because I discovered there something that answered my need for universality, for one of his great convictions is that everything is conscious, but in degree. That is, even inanimate matter has some degree, some direction in which it's going, some awareness that it is moving in a particular direction. And after all, there is repulsion and attraction in inanimate matter. We know that. Electrical. Now, but in any case, I was attracted by that. I always liked the idea that there's a spirit in everything. For instance, when we were filming for The Music of Man in Africa, the film crews were warned not to break branches off trees for the convenience of cameras, because that would be regarded as an offence by the villagers. And the Druids had the same feeling towards trees. But this idea that there were much. Also, he wrote a wonderful book called Unser Christus, Our Jesus, Our Christ. He being a Jew, felt that Jesus was, of course, Jewish. And it's a wonderful book. Anyway, other writers, poets I loved. Again, Willa Cather gave me, when I was in my teens, 2 books. One, Nekrasov's epic poem, translated into English from Russian, Who Can Be Happy and Free in Russia? That was long before the revolution, of course. But you read it today, and it is just as apposite. And she gave me at the same time a book of Heine's poems, Heinrich Heine's poems. I was in the very young romantic age, and I adored Heine's poems. But one of my favorite books is one given to me by Emil Ludwig, the Westöstlicher Divan of Goethe, poems of Goethe. But I haven't read as much as I should have read, because I've been making music. But I love readings. I don't take much to novels, except to Dickens novels. I love Dickens. Diana adores Dickens.
Well, your life is a great adventure, and fiction would be like a very secondary experience.
Yes, that is true. Only to the extent that the novels are very revealing of the life and mentality of the city. For instance, I read all of Balzac,
Well, that's a lot of reading. That's 50 novels.
Yes, doing most of my when I had this what is it? You get it in California from rubbing the wrong plant. You know,
poison ivy.
Poison oak.
Okay.
Poison oak. I remember reading. I didn't read all of Balzac. I read about 6 of his novels, and that I found fascinating at that age. Today, I don't find novels very, very attractive, although I admire them, and I find they're terribly important because they give people an insight into the actual life
Yes.
of human beings and how they lived in villages and how they lived. I find, as a genre, I find the novel terribly important, but somehow or other, I know I've met so many human beings and I can imagine a great deal about them, and I'm not that interested in, and I'm more interested in knowledge, in poetry, and than in fiction. And I've books I carry with me, Lao Tzu, always.
Always, I know you do.
And then Sufi books, I mentioned.
You know the writings of a man who lives in Ojai, California, Krishnamurti.
Yes, I do. I admire
an
them.
Extraordinary.
He's a wonderful man.
Incredible man who
yes.
brings these teachings, ideas.
He's
to
one of
people.
the few men who refused to be a saint.
Yes, he gave that up. They wanted him to be.
They
found him with aura and all,
Yes,
the Theosophists, Besant,
Yes.
and made him into, the Order of the Star.
That's
and
right, and he turned it all down.
He turned all the wealth,
Yes,
the Rolls
yes,
Royces, the
yes,
castles,
yes.
and he said that you're the only teacher yourself. And
yes.
It's an
Oh,
extraordinary.
he's a great man.
Wonderful.
Very
writer.
great man. And there have been other.
I know that when you met
books.
your wife, Diana, you saw finally, in even a far more complete and realistic version, your that first wonder when you saw Pavlova.
Yes. I adored the dance.
And the dance has always been something that you
Yes,
liked.
my mother and father, but it was my mother principally who was the urging spirit, took me to see Pavlova in San Francisco twice. I never forgot that. She was my dream woman.
Could hardly dance, but was one of the great performers, probably.
Yes. Well, she knew a lot about the dance. She did. She chose Diana. She chose my wife before she died as to go with her in her company.
But that never happened, right?
Never happened because Pavlova died just.
Don't you miss those great trains?
I
where
do.
Travel was real.
Oh, leaving San Francisco on the old Overland Limited, not to speak of the city of San Francisco, which was a glorious train, and the old 20th Century Limited, comfortable, and the train was one of the most comfortable was the Crescent, the Southern Crescent, which left New York. So snobbish were those trains that this most elegant of all trains that went from New York to New Orleans had only white service. All the other trains in the country had black attendants who were wonderful, absolutely superb. I mean, the attendants were train porters were a race apart. They were wonderful people. But the Southern Crescent, I think it was called the Southern Crescent, that went from New York to past, Washington, all the Virginia and all the rest, they only had white service.
Incredible.
Isn't that incredible? The same is true of the crack train going from Johannesburg to Cape Town.
But now it's Concorde, and 3 hours, 4 hours from London to New York.
3 hours, 25
No
today.
longer can you relax on a great ship going across the ocean.
That was lovely. The 8 years that we didn't fly, when there was still the Queen Mary and the Ile de France, and those was wonderful. Settling in is extraordinary. The English mentality. The Cunard, the Queen Mary, always gave us an extra cabin adjoining the one we paid for me to practice in, and after an American tour, just settling into these rooms in New York Harbor, having said goodbye to friends, and knowing that we had ahead of us 5 lovely days, eating in the veranda grill in the evening, you know, great style. And then we were very tired, so they had very good stewardess, you know, the old-fashioned type of stewardess, more like a nanny than a stewardess. And she came in, introduced herself. My name is so-and-so, and hope we'll have a good trip. Do you have any clothes to be ironed? Do you have any things to be done? My wife said, no, we're just so tired, we're going to rest. And so we indeed went to rest. And then a little while before dinner, she came back to see that we would be properly prepared for dinner. And the valet came, steward, but she came in first and said, have you had a good rest? And Diana said, yes, we had yes, you've had a good rest, but Mr. Menuhin hasn't rested. She said, and looking very pointedly at the second bed that hadn't been undone.
Oh.
So correct. And Diana said she felt as if she were back in the nursery.
Oh, well.
She wouldn't have approved of the form of rest, the collective rest, combined
Incredible.
rest we had.
Incredible, wonderful. We know of your extraordinary chapter with Furtwängler, and really the trouble you really got yourself into in so many ways.
Well, it wasn't really much trouble. I can understand the people who felt outraged if they were. You see, people are of necessity simple, and you have one criterion instead of 2 or 3. German was sufficient. They didn't draw the line between Nazis and German. They didn't draw the line between good and bad Germans. After all, the English bombed Dresden, which we know today, inexcusable.
Which was a jewel.
A jewel city, inexcusable. It was one of the great tragedies of the war. And not only the city itself, but killed some 135,000 people.
Incredible.
Yes, with 800 bombers.
When there was no necessity for it at all.
It was the end of the war. No necessity at all. Anyway, but still you can say, well, that was war. You can make mistakes. But the mistake was to think that all Germans were enemies or horrible people. And, of course, you couldn't expect the Jews, of all people, to think any better than the English or the Americans. And so they looked upon every German as guilty. And there were no attenuating circumstances. I got myself into this little trouble, which I don't in the least regret, because I had been to Paris a few weeks after its liberation, and I was very interested in what the French reaction to the Germans would be. And I asked my musician colleagues of the orchestra that played, the opera orchestra, I think, played with me, with Munch conducting the opera house. I asked them, just out of curiosity, I said, of all the German musicians, which would be the one whom you would accept today? Unanimously, Furtwängler. Well, I thought, that's important enough to report. And when I came back to New York, I only reported that. I didn't even give it as my opinion. That was all I said. And the proof that there was a built-in clique, shall we say,
yes,
is that the next day the headlines read, Menuhin advisor suggests that Furtwängler be brought back, which is not what I said.
No.
So there was definitely a desire to discredit me along with it was a good pretext, shall we say. But I will also admit that much of it was genuine sentiment upon which the professionals played.
Yes.
In fact, do you know, and this is, I can say it perfectly honestly because it happened, that about a year before the end of the war, when AGMA, the American Guild of Musical Artists, was formed by Heifetz, whom I admired all my life and still do, he wanted to form this to protect the musicians who were not included in the chart of the musicians' union, therefore choristers, and self-employed musicians. And of course he made the greatest mistake of his life then to have signed up orchestras, because then he went straight in competition with and he defeated his own ends
With
by
the big
raising
union, yeah.
raising the union's ire, and Petrillo forcing every self-employed musician to become a member